Hi, I'm John Ficarra. Welcome to Ficarra Classic, and today we're going to get really geeky as we dive into one of my favorite car subjects, the wedge car. Now, what is a wedge car? That was a design style that came out in the late 60s, ran through the 70s, kind of petered out 80s, 90s, and it involved basically getting rid of all curvy lines on a car. Essentially, a wedge. So there's different definitions of what a wedge car is. And again, it's kind of like you know it when you see it. But for me, there's no curvature over the front wheel arch. It just goes straight. It kind of sometimes goes straight into the windshield. It has to be higher in the back than it is in the front. So it's something you use as a doorstop, right? And some of them were incredibly severe. Some were a little bit more subtle. And there's some ones that were close. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you some of my favorites. We're going to start with show cars and concept cars, and then we'll get into what they became in production cars. And if you forgive me, I don't have a fancy teleprompter, so I'm going to use an actual piece of paper. Now, I want to start off with what is commonly called the godfather of wedge cars, and that's the Canera 1, made in 1966 by Ray Canera. Now, he designed it while he was attending the Art Center College of Design in Los Angeles, and he built it out of the chassis of a 1958 Chevy station wagon. This was just a kid building a car. Now, remember, the 60s was the birth of the kit car movement. It was the use of fiberglass really for the first time, and you could just make any shape and crazy thing you wanted. And also there was kind of the dune buggy thing was happening. So this kid just designed himself a car with no curves and a straight line, and it must have been pretty easy to make. This car, people go, well, this was the beginning of it. This was the beginning of that design. I have another suggestion that maybe we go back a little farther. Now, not a pure true wedge, but pretty dang close. And this is during the jet age of the 1950s, was the Ghia Streamline 10, or X. Now, it was made in 1955. It was designed by Giovanni Savanuzzi under the direction of Chrysler's Virgil Exner. And it is extraordinary. Now, you can see the wedge design. It still has the curvatures of the jet age, but there is a wedge there for sure. And this car was originally supposed to have a turbine engine in it and all kinds of cool things. It's really one of my favorites. But I think that is like the great-grandfather of wedge cars. Now, to get into like the first time an actual manufacturer wanted to build a wedge car, their first was Lamborghini, and that was the Lamborghini Marcello, built in 1967. Now, this is a show car. It was designed by Marcello Gandini, who would go on to become really the founder of popular wedge cars. But Gandini set the tone at Bertone, the design house in Italy, for this kind of wedge design. Now, this design really went on to become what became the Espada, which wasn't as wedgy or edgy. It didn't have the really cool side windows on it. But the Marcello was kind of the first time a real manufacturer dipped their toe into the wedge design. Next up would become one of the icons of this era was the Alfa Romeo Carrabbo in 1968, designed by Marcello Gandini at Bertone. Now, this is widely credited with being the pioneer of the wedge look, the severe wedge look. And it introduced for the first time scissor doors, which would go on to another Gandini design, the Countach, which we'll get to a little bit later when we talk about production cars. Now, underneath this car is unfortunately an Alfa 33 Stradale, which to me is one of the most beautiful cars ever built, and the curves on it are phenomenal. And it almost is sacrilege that they scraped them off to become this thing, but really, the Carrabbo is a gorgeous, phenomenal piece of art. Now, the same year came out another brilliant wedge design, and this was the Bizzarini Manta in 1968. Now, this was not designed by Marcello Gandini. This came out from the pen of Giorgetto Giugiaro. He was the other godfather of wedge. The two of these guys would go back and forth through the 70s, designing the most iconic wedge cars. They had the wedge in their DNA. The Manta, to me, is one of the coolest of the Wedge cars. It's slightly rounded in the front, but I'll give it. It just goes beautifully across the whole body. It had center steering like we saw on the McLaren F1 years later. And what was kind of cool was this car was built in 40 days, from the idea to building the concept of this car. And it was built on one of Bizzarini's race cars. So there was a legit car underneath the Manta. Super cool. We move up a year farther and we get to 1969. Gandini's at it again, and he creates the Auto Bianchi A112 Runabout. Now this is cool. Kind of a dune buggy feel to it. Super exotic kind of wedge design. And I love the headlights next to the driver, because a lot of wedge cars, most of them really have pop-up headlights, because you can't put headlights in a true wedge. I think headlights take away from a real wedge. It has to have pop-up headlights somewhere, I think. Anyway, this car was cool. And it would go on to become, and you can kind of see it a little bit, it would go on to become the Fiat X19, which we'll get to in a little bit. Okay, now, we hit 1970 and Wedge is under full steam, and we see the Lancia Stratos HF0 come out. This is designed by Marcello Gandini and Bertone, and it is, I think, one of the best. It is certainly, when car shows happen and they talk about wedge cars, this is the car they roll out. This is the car they put in like the Peterson Museum. It was only 33 inches tall. Remember, the GT40 was 40 inches tall. This is 7 inches lower than a GT40. And that didn't allow for any doors on it. So they had to make the entire windshield a door. So you open up the front of the car to get into it. Obviously not the easiest ingress or egress to get out of it, but it really lent to the design. Super extreme wedge idea. Now this only had a 4-cylinder engine out of a Fulvia in it, but it functioned and ran, and you'll see it actually drive around at car shows. Now Ferrari was not to be excluded from the wedge party. They also wanted a wedge car. Now they, instead of Bertone, they went to their go-to Pininfarina, and Pininfarina came up with the Ferrari Modulo in 1970. Now that was penned by Paolo Martin. Now this is like a really radical low-slung look, and one of the things that made it unique was the forward sliding canopy roof. So instead of having to open the windshield, the whole top of the car slid forward. It was really cool. And the other cool was that the wheels were covered except for the tops of the wheels, like a race car does do now to let the air out the top. It had a real fantastic and extraordinary design. And underneath this car, it had the V12 from a Ferrari 512S. So a legit V12 racing engine. And so this thing could have gone pretty seriously. Now, Ferrari's in on it, so we got to make sure that somebody else is into it too. One of their competitors, Porsche. Porsche comes out with the Tapiro in 1970. Now that's Giorgetto Giugiaro again at Italdesign. Now this car was based on the Porsche 914-6, and it features these brilliant gull-wing doors. It was really cool. And it's one of the Porsches that honestly most people have never heard of or seen. It's super ultra forgotten, and it shouldn't be forgotten because it's a cool looking car. Next up, in 1972, comes the Maserati Boomerang. And this is Giorgetto Giugiaro again. Now this was put on a Maserati Bora chassis, which has the 4.7 liter V8. And the Boomerang is another one of the icons. There's like the big three of the wedge cars, and this is one of them. The Boomerang was absolutely cool and still exists, and you can see it at shows occasionally. I love the Maserati Boomerang. Another German manufacturer jumps into the game in 1972 with BMW with the E25 Turbo. Now that was designed by Paul Brack, and it's essentially, as you can see in the pictures, this is what the M1 came from. Although underneath, it's really a modified 2002 and has the 2002 turbo engine in it, so it's only a 4-cylinder, but really, really, really cool. I love the turbo. And now we get back to Maserati. They go and they design a sedan wedge, which I think is the first wedge sedan, even before the Lagonda. 1974, Giorgetto Giugiaro again comes out with this car, and it is extremely wedged out, and I think a really good-looking car. Never came to production, never built it. Next up is the Lancia Sibilo in 1978. Now this is Marcello Gandini again, and it's very, very brown. Now, you can kind of see a little bit of what it's based on there. It's a Lancia Stratos underneath. They stretched it out, but it's tremendously brown. In fact, it was so brown when it came out, they had to repaint it a lighter brown, because even in the 70s, it was too brown for the 70s, with the round windows and the kind of weird paint fade on the windows. It was wild, but a really cool wedge car. Now we go to America, same year, 1978, and Jerry Wiegert designs the Vector W2. Now the W2 would go on to become the W8 much later when he finally got some funding for the car, but this was going to be a twin-turbo V8 supercar, and it is futuristic as can be. It was something out of a movie, and I still think one of the coolest American cars ever built. Across the pond, the Brits are still at it with the wedge cars, and their crazy concept car, which should have been a production car, was the Aston Martin Bulldog in 1979. Now, this was designed by William Townes, who also designed the Lagonda, and this is a twin-turbo Aston Martin V8. Now, this was supposed to be a production car. So they built it with everything in mind, that they were going to build 50, 60, 70 of these things and sell them to the ultra wealthy. It was also supposed to be the first car to break 200 miles an hour as a production car. And it got really close. Back in the day, it hit like 191 miles an hour. And I think when it was restored, they finally hit the 200 mile an hour mark just to prove it. Cars wouldn't hit 200 miles an hour until the 959, and the Ferrari F40 came much, much later. Now, we haven't seen anything from Lamborghini since the Marcello in 1967, and by 1980, they come out with another concept car, and this is the Athon. Now, the Athon in 1980 was designed by Marc Deschamps at Bertone, who had taken over from Gandini and kept the wedge thing going. Now, this was a wedge spider with the strangest rear deck, but still a wedge car. Really, really insanely wild V8 wedge car. Now, the final one from the early 80s is the Citroën Carène. Now, the Carène was designed by Trevor Fiore. It is a center driver car, and it is a wedge from all directions. It is technically a pyramid. It's crazy. The top of the car is absolutely tiny, and if you had to fit 3 people in it, getting that center driver in there was imperative. It is absolutely wild, and I think it's the ultimate extreme for the wedge idea. Now, wedges would continue influencing concept cars for years, but they started falling out of favor in the late 80s and into the 90s. But you'd still see it in concept cars like the Citroën Aussay in 2001, and that was designed by Pininfarina. That car was really cool. Absolutely forgotten to time, but you can still see the wedge idea there. Now, the show cars and concept cars obviously influenced production cars. And the first production wedge car that I think you could have bought back in the day was in 1972, and it was the Fiat X19, designed by Marcello Gandini and Bertone. And of course, this was the follow-up to the Autobianchi A112 Runabout in 1969. So you can see the similarity, and it's going to be cool if you just kind of took an X19 and maybe chopped it down and made it into an Autobianchi-looking concept car. They're super affordable today, and you can have yourself a nice, affordable wedge car. Now, one of the most famous production wedge cars has to be the Lancia Stratos. This was built from scratch to be a rally car, and it is wedgy as you can get from the front. It is tiny inside. It's got a Ferrari Dino V6 in the back. Nasty. I could do a whole video on that car. Truly amazing, but really one of the ideal wedge cars of the 1970s. Following that was another Italian manufacturer, Ferrari. Although we didn't call it a Ferrari, we called it a Dino 308 GT4. And that car was a true wedge. And interestingly enough, designed by who? Marcello Gandini and Bertone. Now, this was the first time Ferrari had left Pininfarina to get a car design. So it looks nothing like the Pininfarina swoopy cars before it and after it. It is a wedge car. And Bertone nailed it. And in the day, people did not like it. I think it's cool. I bought one years ago and almost got killed in a garage, but that's a whole nother story that I did on VinWiki, which you might want to watch. Anyway, the Wedge 308 is a fantastic car, especially with the European bumpers on it. The American bumpers made it look dowdy and awful, but the European bumpers, it was tidy and beautiful, and a dynamite car. Actually, with the right fettling, handled better than the later 308 GTS. It is a fantastic wedge car. and with its little V8 in the back, absolutely dynamite to drive. Now, another affordable wedge car you can get your hands on is the Triumph TR7, which came out in 1974. That was designed by Harris Mann at British Leyland, and that was a really dynamite little wedge. And it went on to become the TR8 when they put a V8 in it, and interestingly enough, not a Triumph V8. They put the Rover V8 in it. That's a whole nother story. And that would go on to become a really killer race car. Group 44 would race it, but I could go on about that anyway. Cool car, the TR7 and TR8. Now, 1974 was really the day that everything changed in Supercarville, because that was the release of the Lamborghini Countach. Designed by who? You guessed it, Marcello Gandini. It is the ideal wedge car from the 70s as far as being iconic. The folded paper design, which is kind of what lent itself to the wedge idea. The folded paper design, there's no curvy on it. It is straight edges and it's all trapezoids. It is fascinating to look at. Now I'm talking about the early Lamborghini Countach, not the later bloated, covered in wings and spoilers and body cladding and horror show. I'm talking about the early Gandini Periscopo design. Absolutely stunning, beautiful car, legendary, and of course, everybody my age had one on their poster on their wall. Now, to perfectly follow the Countach in 1976 was what I think is the four-door Countach, and that is the Aston Martin Lagonda. And I have one, and I'm proud as hell. I think they are the coolest thing around. Now, this was a true production sedan wedge car, and it is phenomenal. Now, it's hard, I explained this in my Lagonda video, it is hard to appreciate the shapes of the car in photography or on video. It has to be seen in person. And the reason it is that a lot of wedge cars don't show very well in photography because the curves of a car help you see the lines and the light bouncing off of it. But when there's just straight panels, every reflection is very extreme and you don't get the kind of depth and shape of the car. So please, if you get to go to a car show, look at the wedge cars in person. They are amazing, and so is the Lagonda. Check out my video on the Aston Martin Lagonda for more of my fanboy prattling on that car. Now, also in England, Lotus stepped into the game in 1976 with the Lotus Esprit. The first generation Lotus Esprit, fantastic pure wedge car, much like the Countach. As time went on, they got bloated and cladded and rounded and awfuled. And that's okay because tastes changed from the 70s and these cars ran through the 80s and people wanted a more updated look. But the original ones are the wedge cars. And the original Lotus Esprit and Lotus Esprit Turbo, dynamite. Designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro and Italdesign. So not all of them are Marcello Gandini. Giorgetto stepped in and he designed some phenomenal cars, including the next one, which is the BMW M1 in 1978. Now, that obviously was based on the BMW Turbo show car. The BMW M1 is another car I could do a whole video on. The original ones were all built by Lamborghini for BMW. They were built to be a race car from scratch, again, kind of like the Stratos. And they were going to go after Group 4 and Group 5 racing to go against like the Porsche 934 and 935s. And that's a whole different story. You should totally check those out. But the M1, excellent, beautiful wedge car. I don't fit in them, but I'd love to own one. Now, the one production wedge car that has escaped me my whole life because I'm not a millionaire, so can't afford it, is the Isdera Imperator 108i, built in 1984. It was designed by Eberhard Schultz, and this thing is the coolest. It is kind of like the 70s wedge car grew up into the 80s and went even crazier. It's got a periscope rearview mirror, it's got gull-wing doors, and the windshield literally almost reaches the headlights. It is so extreme a wedge. And they built like 30 of these over a decade or so, and they had Mercedes AMG engines in them, and I would trade my Mercy for one in a second. Such a cool car. Again, I think really, honestly, this video would be super long because I could go into all of these cars so much deeper, and I suggest you do. There's a lot of information out there on the interwebs. Going back to one that we could actually afford, and I still think is one of the coolest wedge cars you could buy, was the Subaru XT. Now that, again, has been kind of forgotten, except by real Subaru guys, and it is a legitimate wedge, and they came with 4 cylinders and 6s, and when they had all the 80s accessories, like the rear window louvers, I thought they were the coolest thing. 4-wheel drive. You know, if you put a WRX system underneath that look, I think that would be the perfect car. I would love to build one of those someday. But yeah, Subaru XT, wicked cool car, very cool steering wheel. In fact, there's a bunch of these cars with fantastic steering wheels. The concept cars, obviously, but even some of the production cars got cool steering wheels as well. Now, finally, we get back to America and we get to the Vector W8 in 1989. Now, the W2 was designed in the 70s, and it took this long for Jerry Wiegert to get some funding to build a production car. There are still some Vectors out there, and some of them actually run. That's a rare occasion when they actually work. They were very futuristic, carbon fiber, Kevlar, all kinds of cool stuff. I think they were just way ahead of their time and way beyond the budget of the company to build the right car. And it was a bad economic time they rolled into as well. Speaking of being born at the wrong time, there was another car in 1991. It was the Chisetta Marauder. Now, this was designed by Marcello Gandini again. Now, it wasn't all designed by him. In fact, the front end design was the original design for the Lamborghini Diablo, but Chrysler didn't like it, so they put it aside. So basically, Gandini gave it to this company, and they built a prototype, and I actually got to see that car and help work on that car at Canepa, and it was really one of the wildest cars. And I think I will do a video on that car. It is pretty extraordinary. It is a V16 transverse in the back. It's called the 16T. People think T stands for turbo, but it stands for transverse. So the engine is the entire width of the back of the car. That's why the back of the car is so insanely wide. And they made one functional prototype, which Canepa restored and is now out in the show circuit. And then there were supposedly another 6 to 9 built, but we're not quite sure. I think the only car ever built with 4 individual pop-up headlights. There's 2 on either side, which make for a fantastic look. Yeah, I think I will do a video on that sometime. So that's it. I mean, I've covered a lot of cars. You've seen a lot of pictures. I'm glad you stuck with me through this because I love wedge cars, and I think they added so much to the history of automotive design. It was a great little period of 20 years when things went berserk. And you'll still see that in the language of other cars, like the Lamborghini really kept that wedge front end through the Diablo and the Murcielago. I'm sure we'll see it echoed in new and more modern designs like we did see in the Cybertruck. But it will pop up because there's always echoes that go back to older car designs because designers like to look back and pull things from the past, and hopefully they'll pull a little bit more wedge cars from the past. Now, there are cars I skipped over. There are cars I didn't mention. There are cars that are honorable mention wedge cars, kind of like the Pantera and the Maserati Khamsin and the DeLorean, some people call a wedge car. Now, if you have wedge cars you like, put them in the comments below. I would love to hear about ones I missed or ones I didn't think were wedge cars or whatever you think. I'd love to have the conversation about wedge cars because it is absolutely fascinating. So thank you. Thank you for being geeky with me today because this is some really geeky car stuff and you must be a true car geek if you stuck through all of this so far. And if you are a true car geek, please subscribe and like and tell your friends and ring the bell and all that and help me build this channel because there's more of this crazy geek stuff to come, obviously. And I appreciate you watching today and I want you to have a great day and please come back and watch more of Ficarra Classic.